Buongiorno. You're listening to Going, where God is at work, a podcast where cross-cultural workers discuss everything from faith and fear to finances and faux pas. We're walking out our call to ministry in faraway places and happy to have you join us on the journey. I'm your host, Jesse Pauli, a missions leader serving here in Rome. And I'm here with Alessandro Di Leonardo, our church planter in Cisterna di Latina, and Jen Williamson, our missiologist who lives and works in Lyon. And today we're going to tackle that part about finances that we mentioned in our intro every week. We're going to talk specifically about should missionaries be poor? Should be an interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to it. Good morning, guys and gal.
Good
Hello.
morning. Can I just say that I was just in Vietnam and I was a millionaire.
Really?
Yeah, because they use the Vietnamese dollar and it's in the million.
Wow.
Which going back to when I grew up in Italy, we were using the lira, which was also in the million. And so I once was a millionaire when I was little, and then I became poor, and then just a few days ago I was a millionaire
Man.
again.
It's that easy.
I would not have to do the math about buying my groceries and stuff like that. Like,
Yeah, actually it was so confusing because 5 cents was 5,000.
Wow.
And we're like, I'm holding a $5,000 bill, but it's only like a 5 cent.
That's a whole nother level of learning about culture and languages. Yeah. I don't think, because euro and dollar are so close, I don't often think about this idea of money. Wow, that's good. So I guess Alessandro beat us to it. He's a millionaire, but let's open up and just kind of share as much as you're comfortable with. The question that we want to kick this off with is how are you doing financially? Are you, as a missionary, we're all missionaries to some varying roles in the mission field, but what are you doing? How are you doing financially? Do you have to cut corners to make ends meet, or is your financial situation stressing you out? What does it look like for each of us? What's kind of the state of your finances?
we might point out too that we all live in Europe, so none of us are working and serving in places that are overwhelmingly impoverished.
Yes.
There are poor people everywhere. And there are poor people where I live. There's poor people where you live. But in general, we live in economies that aren't what most of the world would consider poor.
Yeah. But hopefully, I don't think we're not worrying too much about numbers and things as we get in this conversation. It's more about principles. And so hopefully the principles can translate across.
Yeah, I think so. And I would say relative to where you live and work, or relative to where you come from, are you poor, or are you feeling stressed about money, or do you feel like you have enough?
Yeah. So where are you at, guys?
I think I get stressed about money when I find out what somebody else is making.
Comparison
like what? I think it's great that you pointed out, Jen, about how looking back to where you come from. Kind of mentioned before that coming from an immigrant family, and then even where I was living in New Jersey, specifically in a city, rent was super expensive. And so coming to Europe, if there's one thing that's not that expensive, still it can be expensive, but at least compared to where I was coming from, right across New York City, rent is much, much cheaper than when I was paying. So in one sense, I feel like I'm paying nothing for rent, but then there's other things, right? But I gotta say that Jesse knows this about me. Even when I was living in the States, me and my wife, we had to cut corners, not because we're struggling, but because we did something that we just enjoy, trying to make every dollar count. And so I would,
or stretch a penny.
honestly
Maybe that's the right wording. So how to stretch a dollar, stretch a penny, versus
stretch a
dollar. Not that you guys
dollar.
cut corners. You guys
And
do things to excellence and really well done, but you just know how to stretch, I think, your dollars a lot farther.
Yeah. And so there's definitely been moments where we struggled financially. And I think that happens to anyone, right? That it was something you didn't plan for. But for the most part, I think we are in a good place.
Yeah, for us, we I would say we're not I don't want to say we're struggling financially. Again, it's hard to answer the question probably because of the the idea of comparing. I know definitely missionaries who are in a more difficult position than we are. Um, I would say we're not struggling. We're probably not where we would like to be, but we're also not, actually this is, we are part of a mission organization that sets our budget. And so from that perspective, we're right on par with what we're supposed to be at. So
Yeah. So are we. But I would say, compared to what a French pastor makes living and working in France, an American missionary makes a lot more
yeah, I would agree with
based on what their
Italy.
sending organization sets up. Now, it's a little bit comparing apples to oranges because the French nationals also get some benefits um, based on their taxes and things like that. Number of kids in their family, they can get really, really cheap train tickets. There's advantages that foreigners can't always take advantage of. Um, so you need a little bit more to have a similar lifestyle. But that actually has been a point of contention, I think, with some French partners, is American missionaries specifically have a much more elevated lifestyle than their French counterparts in ministry. So that's interesting. So by that comparison, I feel like, I should feel rich, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. But then when we play the comparison game, like you said, compared to people my age with my education who are living and working in the States, it's easy to feel like, wow, I don't make enough money, or wow, I'm not earning anything. So uh, we were both, David and I, working full time and had one salary because that's how our mission organization did it at the time. They're starting to change that now because that's just not right. Two full-time workers, and they would only let us raise for basically one family rate. Since then, the past 4 years, my husband has actually stopped working as a missionary and gone and has another job. So we're now a two-income family. So by comparison to now people within our own mission agency and things like that, we're quite well off. Again, if we compare to people our own age with our same career and education experience back in the States, we're playing major catch up on things like retirement.
Yeah.
We were not investing enough for retirement through our 40s, and now we're in our 50s, and we are having to really scramble.
Yeah, no, that's a good point to point out the idea of retirement, and I would say, dare I say, even if we compare ourselves to other missionaries, um, even within our same context, I know that there's definitely missionaries in Rome, and I see their ministries, so I'm like, wow, they definitely are doing, have a higher salary than we have, can afford things that we can't afford. So, um, and then I know that there's mission agencies where it's like they don't set a standard, and it's just like whatever you raise and whatever you feel comfortable to go with. Once you've reached that, you can go. And I don't know how well that is either, but the idea is, I guess traditionally the world of missions is changing a little bit, but traditionally we're supported by churches and individuals in our sending countries for the most part that give sacrificially to our ministry, and much like what Paul refers to in his letters like Philippians and so forth, where he talks about like a partnership and working, co-laboring together with us through their giving, through their prayers. And so even as I state that question or think through that, it's kind of humbling to think about how, you mentioned, Jen, in a previous episode, like a single mom giving, what she could to you guys. And we have a similar situation, a couple of retired people who are living on fixed income and different things. And yeah, it's overwhelming, I would say, at least for us sometimes. We were just back, and to see different people and to hear things that we didn't know also, despite we in our last episode talked about connectivity, we didn't know some of the things that they were facing in their personal life. But to know that throughout their hardship, they continued to sacrificially give, definitely made us more grateful and thankful. And even with our kids, we've been, our kids are very small, but we've been praying for and reminding them that we want to be thankful to the people that provide for our life here as we serve God here.
Yeah.
So what's your guys' relationship or feeling with those supporters that you have?
I think to kind of swing the pendulum to the other side, I think there's also sometimes this need to feel gratitude, sort of like you owe something to them because somebody's supporting you. So I agree totally what Jesse you just said, but I think sometimes there was the over like the sort of like the temptation to feel like I owe you something now. And so thankfully prior to becoming a missionary, I've experienced moments where people did support me when I went through seminary, and then also I did mission trips, short-term mission trips, and this and that. And so that prep work helped me a lot to realize that they're investing in what God's doing, not necessarily
Yeah.
in me, although they are specifically giving to me and my family. And so I think it's a fine tension of making sure that you appreciate what God is doing, and giving thanks to God, and are thankful that these people are giving, but never making it to the point that then you feel like you owe something. And so I just wanted to throw that in there. Um, I do thank God for the way people sometimes go above and beyond, because they feel that God's calling them to do that. I
Right.
would never want them to do that if God's not telling them to do it.
Yeah. We found that we're more overwhelmed and surprised by that, that generous giving that God would prompt and lead people and invite people to be a part of what we're doing. That was always much more surprising than the people that you ask and maybe you think, oh, this person's one of my best friends, for sure they'll support us, and then they say no, which happens all the time too. But that wasn't nearly as like that was okay. What was really amazing to me was the surprising people that would be like, yeah, maybe I hadn't even asked them yet, and they called and said, "Hey, we heard you're going to France, and we really want to support you." And you're thinking, "Wow, I didn't even ask
Yeah,
yet."
for
That's
sure.
those moments. So, we've always like raising our kids too. We said God always gives us enough for everything that we need and some of the things that we want. So we have to look at, what do we need this month, and we didn't ever want, mostly with raising kids, we didn't want them feeling poor. We didn't want them, not because there's anything wrong with being poor, but because it didn't reflect the generosity of the God that we know and love and serve, the Father heart of God who provides abundantly for his children. And so we always tried to frame, even, when things were really tight and, they had wants that we couldn't fulfill, to remind them that, man, we have everything that we need, and we even have some of the things that we want. And this month, that's not going to be a want we're going to get, and it's okay to want it, but it's also okay to not have it. Yeah.
Yeah, that idea of having to deny yourself something. I think sometimes we're missing that in the West. I know I have some nieces and nephews, and it seems like if they say they want it, that turns pretty quickly into a need, and they have it. But yeah, that whole concept of God does provide. And one of the verses, I don't know about you guys, but as we were support raising, we were encouraged to like have a verse that we held on to, and that was for us in Romans. Now I'm forgetting if it was 10:30 or 15. Anyways, where he talks about, for all things are from, through, and to God. And that was something that was really encouraging to us to remember, and even now to be stewards and use the many blessings that we've had for his kingdom and for others, and hosting people or being able to encourage others. And it was interesting. I didn't, as we were preparing for this, I didn't realize that this was an article as well. Jen, you shared with us that there's this article that you had read, Missionaries and Millionaires. I heard this quoted by some pastor friends who are missionaries, and they told me once we were at this very, very fancy dinner that someone was putting on, and they said, I was just kind of in shock a little bit, because I had never, we're in Italy, we have lots of courses, we're used to that even at a lower level, but this was like, really fancy, and I didn't feel like I should be there. And they said, you're here, you're supposed to be here. And they said, we had to remind ourselves, or we encouraged ourselves years ago when we we're exposed to these things that some things millionaires experience and missionaries experience. And it is strange feeling because you live off of the donations of others and you're not trying to live a lavish lifestyle, but the context that you live in might just afford opportunities that you wouldn't have been afforded. We come from the Midwest, and in Nebraska we wouldn't have been afforded the same. 3 hours of travel in Nebraska gets you to the other side of Nebraska, not to 2-3 different countries away. So
Right.
have you guys had any experiences like that where you go to something and you're just like, wow, like I don't know if I'm supposed to experience this as a missionary? I mean, Alessandro's in Vietnam right now. I mean, I don't know how many people just get a pickup.
Well, Philippines
that's
now,
right.
but well, actually, that's the thing that the story. It's not a shocker to me, more of a shocker to someone looking from the outside. An unbelieving friend, a really close friend of mine, who has a good job. I remember once. I think I was visiting back. I don't quite remember if I even came to Italy yet. But she asked me, genuinely asking me, "How can you afford all the trips that you do?" And I just told us like the Lord brings me to these places. He really does. I mean, most of the times flights are paid or something happens or it's covered. And, like there are things that we go there for. I'm not vacationing, but not always, but really God providing for those things. And I think I wasn't thinking about how unusual this is, at least from her context, that she's coming from the US working hard, making a paycheck, and not be able to afford even one trip. And there was a lot of layers that went to it, being also very busy. But at the same time, that kind of made me realize, oh, wow, I am poor but blessed to be able to go into all these places and travel and
Yeah.
see so much of the world.
Yeah. I think, Jesse, like you were saying with the country thing, like we have to go to an annual conference every year. It's already in our missions budget. So it kind of feels like a free trip because our support has already paid for that account. And we can, depending on where you live, you can choose to drive or fly. Well, when we were in, for instance, Slovenia all those years, we would drive from Lyon, France, and we'd drive across the northern tip of Italy and you could kind of break it up into 2 days and still fit it in our travel budget and get to, go see, go to Milan and see the Last Supper. And like experience like that, people have to, make a trip to Milan, and it's a big old vacation and it's this whole very expensive thing. And for us, it was just a logical stopover. So, I mean, there's so many experiences like that. And it's a work trip. Yeah.
Yeah, I was surprised when I was back. Certain people, had that kind of similar to you, Alessandro, where they're like, wow, how do you afford that? Or how do you do that? And then there are other people who were like almost felt pity for me. And they're like, oh man, you have to go to those places. Like they're happy not to have to travel a lot. And so it was almost the
That's
reverse.
true.
They were like, I would not want to have to do that. That was interesting. But as we traveled with the kids, I was shocked how many people would ask, oh, is this their first flight? And we were like, no, they've actually been on like 20 flights. This isn't a new thing for them.
Yeah. We just got asked that question with my kids too, and I said, no, they were born flying.
That would be an interesting, but yes.
Yeah.
No, it is really. I think we talked last episode about the technology and the ease of travel, and that changes things. And travel is only one probably element of this,
Right.
But yeah, you can sometimes feel a little bit different because of these opportunities. So in 1 Timothy 5, 17 through 18, it says, the elders who direct the affairs of the church well are worthy of double honor, especially those whose work is preaching and teaching. So for scripture says, do not muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain, and the worker deserves his wages. So Paul's talking about Christian workers being worthy of their pay. So kind of shifting gears a little bit, if we can kind of dive into this idea is, people are donating and giving to our ministry or to the work that we're doing. But this is part of us responding and acting out a call that God gave us to serve Him in ministry. And so it seems like, we are worthy of the pay that we're receiving. What, like, is that enough? It's interesting. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, Jen, because especially this part where it talks about worthy of double honor,
Yeah, I mean, the double honor, I don't even know what that means. I do know, the Catholic tradition, priests, nuns, they took vows of poverty. And so there can be this generally accepted idea that if we're in ministry, we should only have just enough to live off of. And in the one sense, I get that, because then there was the church that, extravagances and taking advantage of it. And I don't want to get wealthy off of the single mom working 2 jobs who gives us $10 a month. I don't, she's working hard too and deserves her wages. And so there is a reasonableness aspect to it. But I think something that's come to me too as I get older is like most jobs though, there's room for advancement. You get better at it and then you make more widgets, and if you make more widgets, then you earn more money or whatever it is. And man, and maybe if you're a pastor at a church, you get an annual raise or whatever. And from time to time, we're allowed to take lifestyle raises, but then we have to go back and raise more money to be able to take the raise, and that interrupts ministry and mission and all that. And then, like I said, as you get closer to retirement, maybe we did have enough to live off of in our 40s, but saving for kids' college, saving for retirement, maybe we're going to need to help aging parents. There's a lot there. And then we got advanced degrees. Most people, you get another degree, you get a pay bump, you get a doctor of ministry, and you don't get a raise. So, there's a lot in there. And I again, I feel like God has provided very generously for us. But I wonder, do we think that missionaries should missionaries be able to take a vacation? Should they have enough money to be able to budget for vacation? What if you eat out? Is that being extravagant? Or is that what normal people do? Eat out or order Uber Eats from time to time.
Not to mention,
and I think,
sorry if I jump in, but I think also there's a difference when you're outside of your community, your family and your friends, where you
right.
there's even in like a North American context where we're more individualistic, you still lean on family and friends as like babysitters or different things. Whereas here, you have to pay for all that extra. You have some expenses that are
Yeah,
different because you're not,
totally.
I think too, the other part that I was thinking as you were saying that, Jen, is like the cultural element, to that piece of, even in different churches in America, it's different. Not, for example, I'll use this example. I was talking to a black pastor, and he was talking about how typically in the black church, musicians, especially the organ player, the piano player, gets paid to play. So even that is, and then also the congregation typically gives like lavish gifts to the black pastor. Just part of the culture that you honor that person with different things, which may not happen in like a white evangelical church or something where that you volunteer on the worship team and maybe one staff member is the worship leader or something. So yeah, I think also the cultural shift of Sorry, I didn't mean to derail us a little bit there.
I'll tell one of my favorite stories about like this idea of missionaries being poor. I was in the States visiting my sister, who's a professor, and at the time it was when David and I were living off of one missionary income, and she was one of our supporters. She still is, and made quite a bit more money than I did. And we were about to go out to lunch, and I said, "I'm going to buy your lunch," and she looked at me like I was an idiot, and she said, "You're not going to buy my lunch. I make so much more money than you." And I said, "So I'm not allowed to be generous?" And she was like, "Oh, I guess you are, but do we think, in other words, like, should missionaries be so poor that they can't even be generous, that they aren't allowed, because I think that's a great equalizer, especially in the kingdom of God. All of us are allowed, even called, to be generous with what we have.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, that what a what a story. I feel like I'm gonna use that when someone tries to buy my lunch, and then depend how much it is though. If it's too much, then I let them pay. No, but I think going back to the verse where it says the worker deserves his wages, I think that's the point, is to kind of going to the story that you just said, Jen, like the right to then decide what to do with that money. uh, you don't get to say we need to have this much because we're afraid you're gonna then go crazy. Of course, that happens to everyone, right? We need some sort. We're not doing this alone. We're not lone rangers. We're going out and hoping to make it. We're working as a team. We have partners, supporters. We have mission agencies, and so we work it out together. But ultimately, don't devalue the work that I'm doing. I'm worth it. And then yes, I need some guidance. Help me out. How do I do this? What to do with that?
Man, that's really good. That what you just said, Sandro. I haven't thought of it in
Yep.
that way, but yes, it's not the amount of money that someone gets paid that determines if they're going to be a good or worse steward. Sometimes we think that if
Yep.
you only get paid a little bit, you're only going to use that for essentials, but that's not true. I know the guy that begs on the corner of my street. I've given him money. I see how he spends it. He literally walks around the corner, gets a box full of booze, and sits there and drinks himself to sleep. And then the next morning begs. So it doesn't, just because he doesn't have money does not mean he's stewarding the money well. So yeah, I
Right.
do think we have to be aware of that idea that it's not the amount of money that one makes or doesn't make. Even if you just listen to some of these financial, radio shows or podcasts, you hear callers that they're like, he makes six figures, but he won't spend any of it ever. Or you have the
Or the other way around, he makes six figures and he's $800,000 in debt.
exactly right there. That's what I was gonna say. It's like, so it doesn't matter how much or little someone gets paid, and I think this verse is saying, we should, evaluate what is, a correct or fair amount to pay each person. And the other thing I was thinking about too is we're all reaching different people. And like if I'm trying to reach somebody of a certain salary category, it's going to be kind of hard if I can't afford to do anything that, that would be in that same, you know, uh, same
Yep.
element. Some of the guys that we were ministering to when we first got here, they didn't have extra money to be able to go to have a club membership for a soccer team or a gym membership. So all of those people were not being touched by anybody in that church because no one in that church was in that side of society, involved in that part of the community around them. I was getting ready to go into Italian there in Torno, but anyways, the idea of yeah, it's one thing to be good stewards of the money that we have, and it's a whole nother thing to be poor or not. We kind of digressed a little bit, but I appreciated, Jen, that comment that you made about the equalizer being generous and being able to be givers. I was My eyes were open to that because my wife comes from a family of missionaries. Her uncles and aunts and father, they were all missionaries, have been missionaries for a long time. And I was shocked when I got more, into the family to learn how many of them support other missionaries. And that was a new thing for
Yeah.
me to think, wow, they're living off of people giving towards their ministry and then they're giving out to other people. And it's just kind of, it almost seems silly, but then I started, as I've matured, learned the need for generosity and continuing that. And I encourage that to all missionaries that we're supporting or that I'm coaching along. I encourage them, look for someone that you can invest in their kingdom work as well.
Mm-hmm. Agree. And the research shows, I don't know about when you guys were support raising, but there were a lot of people who said, oh, well, we're not going to give, but we'll pray for you. And that's great. I'm not devaluing prayer, but I will tell you what the research shows. The people who are praying for you are the people who are giving.
Mm.
When you give to someone, you are much, much more likely to invest in praying for them. And so I find that is our experience as well. When David and I are blessed to give and support missionaries as we are able to right now, we do find ourselves praying for those people and wanting to read their newsletters and being curious about how God is working in their lives and interested and invested. So, and not in a controlling way, not in a, how are they using our money way, but really in a genuine, we're a part of this team. We're getting to invest in this and we're excited about what's going on there. So, I guess two things about that. One is that, yeah, I agree with you, Jesse. It's always good to think about whatever we have, how are we being generous with it? But on the other side of that, as I'm living in both sides of that, both one who receives donations and one who gives donations, it helps me, as Alessandro was alluding to earlier, not actually feel guilty about the people who are giving to me, but realizing in how much joy I have giving and supporting God's work through others, that maybe that's how others, feel about giving to us.
Yes. So what kind of advice could we give the listener? I'm sure we'll have people listening to this. Some are probably in full-time ministry or have family or friends that are in full-time ministry. Some people that are listening probably support missionaries. I'm assuming that, a podcast on missions is going to be listened to by people that are invested in some area, whether they're on the field or giving. What kind of advice can we give on how to talk about money in this interesting lifestyle that we all live?
I would. This is one of the many things that we can say. I would say that nobody likes to talk about money openly in general, but we should at least talk to somebody about it. Your sending agency, friends, about kind of figuring out like, hey, how do you do this? People you trust and people that you can understand a little bit about what's a reasonable amount. I know before coming to Italy, I made the mistake of not coming with the mission agency. I am now part of a mission agency now, but I didn't come. But thankfully, my brother was part of a mission agency, so he sent me what he was earning, and I just kind of was able to look through what he was earning and to be able to figure it out. I think if he didn't send me that, I would have zero clue. And so you definitely need to talk about it. You can't kind of say like, this is what I think. I did some homework online. I would definitely do more than just some homework. Talk to people, and then I would say what you earn the first year, maybe even the second year, is never gonna be what you're gonna be getting eventually. That's like a trial, like a moment to kind of figure things out.
Oh, yeah. So adjust. That's good advice.
Yeah.
That's good advice. I was going to say transparency. Um, when we were first raising support, we just let our supporters see our whole budget. We said, here's how much they're thinking we're going to need to buy a car. Here's how much they're giving us for a housing allowance. Um, this is what language school is going to cost us. This is, what we're going to have to live off of. This is what we're going to need for travel expenses. Like we've just always been transparent. If anybody wanted to ask to see my pay stub, I'm happy to send it to them. Because I think, yeah, I want to be I want to be, I want to be held responsible for what I'm getting. I want to be worthy of my pay. But I think being transparent is just helpful. Then there's not this wondering when they do see the pictures of me, next to the Last Supper in Milan. They're not thinking, "Oh my gosh, does she even work or is she just over there touring Europe?"
Yeah, no, it's good. The idea of transparency. I struggled with that at first because I didn't know how well my constituency would actually understand the cost. Because I think there was in the group in the kind of the circles we were going in, there was this kind of old school mentality of of being a more poverty mentality to all people. I think generally Christian workers, they had that, and I think it's changing over time. And I actually think this is a positive to the connectivity of the world, the lower rates of travel, because some of the supporters that we have did not or travel themselves, and so it's like, okay, they've been exposed. But I would say if I had to give any advice I'll give two pieces. One for the missionary raising support. I would encourage them to really trust God and recognize that the timing for when their support comes in, or when it goes up and down while they're on the field, all of that, God is going to provide throughout it. And so really to lean into their faith during those moments.
Amen.
And I think for the people that are supporting missionaries, hopefully just this podcast, but also there's lots of articles, like read and look up how you can support your missionary, not just financially, but how you can support them and encouraging them, because missionaries burn out a lot because they don't rest, because of they're afraid that they can't, take a vacation, or that they should work 50 hours a week or more hours.
Yep.
And so I would encourage those that are supporting to be encouraging and learning how they can support their missionaries that they invest in, to have healthy rhythms and to use and steward their money, not just for the bare necessities, but also for taking care of their family and mental health and things like that. Because I think it's so important. That's
good. Yep.
Well, thank you guys again for listening and for joining us in this conversation on doing missions with. This is Going, a podcast where we talk about going where God is already at work across the world. We hope that this was encouragement to you. We hope this conversation was good and beneficial to you. And please like, subscribe, do all of the different things that help promote this podcast to your friends and family.